Hello, and welcome to Energy Efficient Faith Buildings Part 2. This is a long awaited conversation, and I'm so glad you've joined us. I'm Sandy Plett, Climate Action Coordinator for Mennonite Church Canada. Before we begin the presentation of a recording from our conversation, let me introduce the two people who inspired this evening. Christy Dagenhart is a member of St. Julian's Table in Beausejour, Manitoba. Last year, during the Energy Efficient Faith Buildings conversation, Christy observed the conversation, and as we were discussing stewardship questions about faith buildings, she noticed that there was no one-size-fits-all solution to the myriad efficiency questions. Her observation led her to suggest that perhaps further conversation would be helpful for folks across our nationwide church to name the complexity of looking for efficiency solutions, but also to find common ground and mutual support in the work of expressing faith through facility care. I mulled this idea over for a year and consulted with others, and in conversation with Christy, we decided that we'd attempt to pull together such a conversation as this in conjunction with the launch of the emissions reduction grant for 2024. And that's where we are today. You'll meet Christy in the recording in just a few minutes. I also want to introduce Nelson Lee. Nelson is part of Chinatown Peace Church in Vancouver, BC. He is part of the Mennonite Church Canada family and holds years of experience in environment, health, and safety in the oil and gas sector. Nelson was one of the first people I spoke to about the emissions reduction grant in 2023 before its launch. What stood out to me, besides Nelson's obvious expertise in efficiency conversations and climate, was that he sees very closely the connection between caring for creation through reducing our impact on the environment and energy efficiency work. In fact, Nelson made it clear from the beginning that even telling our stories of working towards energy efficiency is a form of outreach. As you'll hear him explain in just a few moments, Nelson recently published a book called Smart Climate Moves and has generously agreed to share some insights about faith and energy efficiency with us. I'm so grateful that Nelson joined us and that he is willing to help us connect these dots.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sandy, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I come to you here from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, so in the West Coast, and I come to you also as a brother. I am an engineer, but I'm coming more as a brother than an engineer today. And as Sandy said, here's the book. I always get this mixed up. Whoops, there you go. That's the book. And the idea of the book is really to try to let people know that we can start taking climate action now. Basically, any organization. We don't have to wait, not for the government or anybody. And I think I'm going to plan to share some reasons why we should be interested in energy efficiency. So let me just share my screen and get that going and start from the beginning. There we are. So energy efficiency buildings, and I'd like to start with some context and background that gets us into why the real big, and particularly bring in our faith into this. I think that's really important. That's something we have unique that others don't. And then connect some dots, and which is where we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of the energy efficiency, and hopefully leave enough time for discussion. And so the context, and so efficiency, we all know, is about resource optimization, energy. This is what we know, and it has economic implications, saving money, for example, more time efficient. Now let me add a few more to the topic of efficiency. For example, when we're efficient, we reduce the environmental impact. And particularly when we're talking about energy efficiency, most of our energy these days we get it from fossil fuels. And fossil fuels, when they're combusted, create pollution, air pollution in particular. So when we're efficient, we're reducing that pollution. We're reducing pollution. And we're also mitigating, which means reducing climate change, the effects of climate change. Because when we burn the fossil fuels, we put greenhouse gases in the air. So that's one efficiency when we're efficient, we're reducing environmental impact. We're also improving the quality of things. What as we strive to be more and more efficient, we find we're setting higher standards. There are fewer errors, little less waste, so things are better. And we're making societal progress, I say. For example, as we improve efficiency, we're enhancing the living standard. So people's quality of life is better. And their access then to service, because we're not spending all the money on say energy or whatever, we have some left over because we're being very efficient. Now, when we think of energy, for the longest amount of time, it was burning things, wood and whatever, stuff like that, or it came from animals. Maybe we still use animals, right? People were at one point a big source of energy. If you're somewhat well off, you maybe had one or two people working for you. They call them slaves, right? And if you're quite well off, you maybe had a dozen. If you're like a ruler of a city, you might have 100 or so. Actually, with the fossil fuels energy we have nowadays, each of us on this call today has about 100 slaves, the equivalent of about 100, maybe even 200 slaves. Yeah. So we also use wind power, water power, all these things. That was the first many, many centuries of our existence, people existence. Then we brought in just 200 years. In 200 years, suddenly it shifted. Coal, that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and climate change was beginning, but nobody really noticed it too much. A little air pollution. Remember London, the smogs of London, all air pollution. When we brought in oil about 130, 150 years ago, that the application was really good for mobility. So cars could begin, right? We started spreading out all over and becoming quite mobile. But then the impact on the climate started in a greater degree. And then probably 50 years or so ago, it was gas for heating. And we thought it was a lot cleaner. But now we're moving into LNG, and yeah, now we're really, because we're combusting so much coal, oil, gas, and LNG, that it's really we have a runaway effect on climate change, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, in that mix of energy, we also had nuclear. Good and bad, I don't want to argue about that. I mean, certainly it has many challenges for sure, and it's very expensive, but it doesn't it doesn't impact the climate the way these coal, oil, and natural gas do. Added to the bottom of that, we have a lot of electricity, and you'll see these big grids, the big poles with the wires on it. Yeah, those are the way we shared electricity in the past, and maybe some think that we need a lot more of that so we can share even more electricity. Maybe, but maybe we can be more decentralized as well. And one big opportunity we have is in what I call renewables. So solar, wind, geothermal. Geothermal, there's some really interesting technologies being developed. And the good thing about geothermal is that energy is there all the time, 24/7. Whereas obviously the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. But it's a clean revolution, and the costs are dropping so low that none of these other technologies can compete with it, really, if you're just looking at the economics. So there's opportunities here, but this is energy. So when we talk about energy efficiency, we're being efficient with the use of energy. We have all these other benefits too, right? And so let me give you some background, bringing the greenhouse gas side of energy efficiency to the picture. So if in a background, and the way I'd like to look at it is, God was so, how to say, preparing such a wonderful place for us that he took about 9.2 billion years in what maybe scientists call a Big Bang. I don't know how it really happened, but building this universe to the point where the sun, and then shortly after the Earth could be developed. And it took another 3.7 billion years before the first life could emerge. And 2.4 billion years later, oxygen started. And when we had that oxygen, we started increasing, well, we had the gravity, but now we started increasing the atmospheric pressure with nitrogen and everything we need to live. So if you think about it, uh, angels didn't need anything, right? They didn't need a planet. They seemed to be okay without that. But we, people, and all the creatures, we need a certain amount of gravity and a certain amount of atmospheric pressure, or we'll explode, right? If we went up into space without a spacesuit, boom, pop, right? We need it. And so I'd like to think God made this just perfect, right? And then 1.8 billion years ago, single cell life started. Maybe 300 to 500 million years ago, dinosaurs and all the trees and all the plants started growing. This is where the fossil fuels came from. And then our current biodiversity, the plants and animals that we see these days, started 66 million years ago. So you can see this long process, God working to make everything right. And then just in the last 11,000 years, finally, as far as we know, the only time a stable climate within 0.5 degrees on an average temperature, right? You still have cold places and warm places, but on an average for the whole Earth, within 0.5 degrees Celsius for 11,000 years. And that allowed agriculture to develop, that allowed civilizations to develop because everything was stable. Right? We could count on seasons, right? As the Bible talked about, the seasons are there. We can count on it. We can count on how life is going to be, the weather. People in colder places would wear more clothes, and people in warmer places would wear less, right? And you build houses that are different. That was all right. I call that the Goldilocks. So God made everything just right? Not too hot, not too cold, right? Everything just right for us. However, in the last 200 years, people, and I would say affluent people, have burned indiscriminately too much fossil fuel. So in the last 200 years, this is running away. And now we have what I call human-driven, call anthropocentric climate change. We're warming and warming the planet way faster beyond that 0.5 degrees. And so it's another reason, serious reason to be more efficient with our energy. Right? So the way the climate, is a quick little chart on it, the natural sun heats up the planet and then infrared goes back up. And there's a little bit of heat trap, and that keeps our planet warmer than it would be without that effect. But with the human enhanced greenhouse effect, we're trapping way more heat in, and we're warming even faster. And so this graph is showing, the blue line is showing what temperature might be if it was just the natural factors, volcanoes, the solar cycle, everything else that's going on, they'll call it the albedo effect, where the reflectivity of the sun, of the earth rather. So the North Pole, South Pole, white, ice, shiny, reflects most of the light. The oceans absorb most of the energy, right? So that would be the effect. And you can see maybe it's even kind of trending down. That would be the natural effect. But with the human drivers, that's the yellow line, we're moving up. And the black line shows that's what we actually observe, what we actually measure. Here's what the temperature are. It's just going up. And the human drivers are following that same line. It indicates, no, climate change is not a natural effect. We've added to the effect that I guess the original effect that God created, we're adding to that. And what happens when we have climate change? Well, some of the things that we've experienced, those red dots are what you and I have seen, right? And what we're seeing now, especially in the prairies, drought. We're forecasting the most severe drought we've had in a long time in BC. I think Probably going to get the same thing in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I don't know and probably Manitoba too. I think it's going to go through the whole provinces. Heat, uh, even heat dome effects. Remember in Canada, in roughly northern part, we had the hottest temperature ever, and other than parts of like Death Valley, the hottest temperature ever in North America, in Canada, right? It happened in Canada, and about 700 people died from that. And fires, of course, last year, the fire season started in Alberta, ironically, in what was it, about March or so. They've already started in Alberta and BC, right? Back in February. So these are some of the effects, and the other effects, the floods, pests, disease, all this will affect the food. Now, of course, we're rich enough, we can buy food. We can outcompete anybody. We just pay a little bit more for it. It might get more expensive, but we can pay for it and we'll have it. Not so for some of the people in the world, right? That's one of the problems with climate change. And then when food, one of the biggest effects there, food, but also water and air pollution, the heat stress, all these things come together, it'll affect our health. So they're all tied together. And even in a rich country like Canada, people's health are suffering because of climate change. Imagine even more in places like Africa or South America, Asia. And in particular, I'll remind you, a lot of the Christian church is in those places, right? Our brothers and sisters. So connecting our faith, how is energy efficiency connected to our faith? Well, one reason alone, I think this is enough. Like why we care about climate change, love for God. Right? We sing a song like, "This is my Father's world." Throughout the Bible, there's places where God created the heavens and the earth. This is his world. Of course, he graciously gives it to us to live. I mean, we couldn't live without it, right? Just think, everything you have, just look at yourself. All my clothes, right? The air that Sandy told us to breathe, right? A little water in my cup, all the food, your house. Name me anything that you have that did not come from this good earth. Maybe the only thing is maybe some blessings from God, right? Maybe the more spiritual side. Everything else came from here. Everything we need to live. And if we're alive, we can then worship God, right? We can talk about him. We can praise him. We can do all. That's why we're alive. If we were to jettison off into space, if we didn't have the earth, boom, we're not alive, right? We're not like angels. So that reason alone, just for the love of God, we should care about energy efficiency, about stewardship, right? About caring for creation. But I'll give you 3 more reasons. Love for one another, right? We care for other people. And if we love them, I'm not talking about the huggy, oh, I love you. No, I'm talking about the love like that says, how can I help you? How can I provide for you? How can I support you? Right? Provide for your needs. That is another reason. Our fellow creatures, some of them whom we eat, or our plants, we may eat them or we may use them for clothing or different things. That's another reason. And they all belong to God, right? God even looks at the little sparrows. None of them fall to the ground without his attention, right? They all matter to him. So this should matter to us, I think. And then if nothing else, just for ourselves, right? Our needs and benefits, right? So that was another, but I have a few more, or one more rather, a good witness. So here's my vision, right? And people have witnessed in many ways. For example, the people have said food kitchens, right? That kind of thing, or shelters. That's one of the things happen where I am in Chinatown Peace Church in Vancouver, in the downtown east side. Quite often people need food. They need shelter, particularly cold nights. No, they're sleeping on the streets. So we'll open the sanctuary and allow people to sleep in there. That's one way we can witness to God's love, right? We can share God's love that way. Another way is imagine if people saw Christians, how about Mennonites, for example, really being good stewards with energy, being energy efficient, being doing all the things we need to do, and I think that would be a great witness. A lot of the I'll call them secular people, the people who don't know the Lord, a lot of them in Canada, yeah, it's probably the majority in Canada, unfortunately, but a lot of them are concerned about creation, right? They're concerned about the environment, they're concerned about climate change. Wow, what a witness. I could just imagine what a witness if we're just doing the right things and helping others do that, showing them here's how you do it, right? Here's the way you go. I think that'll get them thinking, why are those people acting that way? Maybe it's God, right? Anyways, that's my sort of hope. Um, Now, one thing tie into about energy, the affluent billion, and we're all part of this affluent billion or so, rough numbers, create causing 50% of the climate change, right? And the poorest 50%, some of those sisters and brothers in Africa, South America, parts of Asia, are contributing less than 10% of the climate change. So it leaves, the 40% in the middle is about an average, if you will. So us affluent are contributing 5 times the average. And the average is not good, but we're doing it at a 5-time rate. And the poorest 50% are contributing at a 1/5 of the average rate, right? They're totally almost not responsible for climate change at all, yet they suffer disproportionately almost all of the effects of climate change because their countries are too poor. They can't bail them out, right? Like our country can. They don't have insurance. They don't have a friend. If we get hit by a flood or a natural disaster, maybe a neighbor could help us or a friend or family. In some of these poorer places, everybody's hit. Nobody can help anybody. So it's a social justice issue. Uh, Related to energy is all that the colonialism, the mentality of this is my right. This land I own it. I own this, and you don't, right? So that sort of mentality, and then capitalism with our fossil fuel infrastructure we have nowadays. Most projects are in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, even to the billions. An oil sands plant is 10 billion, 10, $20 billion. Not many of us can go to the bank and get a loan for $10 billion, right? Even 100 million, most of us probably can't do that. But we can get a loan for $1,000 for some solar panels, right? So one of the things is fossil fuel requires this capitalist, large capital structures. Only the very, very, very rich can get in the game. Whereas renewable, everyone could potentially. It's a leveling of the playing field. It's a social leveling, if you will. Anybody can get in there, including some of the poorest people in the world. Right? So that's another reason we should be interested in energy efficiency and energy. And just to close off here, when we're saving energy because we're being efficient with it, we're not just saving the energy, we're saving money, right? Because it's costing us less. We're efficient with it. We're also reducing pollution because most of the air pollution we have is coming from the combustion of fossil fuels. And if you think, as Mennonites, we think, well, the world is in a bad shape with all the wars we have, right? Russia, Ukraine, Israel and Gaza, in Africa, there's many, many wars. How many people actually have died from those wars? Maybe pushing 1 million, something, that 9 million people die every year from air pollution, from the combustion of fossil fuels. So like almost 10 to 1 compared to the wars. So if we're saddened about the wars, we should be saddened about air pollution. And so when we reduce the energy consumption, we're being more efficient with it. We're also reducing air pollution. And then the natural disasters that happen, these oil and gas facilities are dangerous places. If you go there, you have to wear special protective equipment because they could have a flash fire. Or there's dangerous gas called H2S, knock you down dead in a few seconds, right? With a very low concentration. So there, and then the fracking, using all the water and the chemicals, potentially causing pollution, but at least using a lot of water, especially in a time when we maybe are short of water. So it's not a great industry to be supporting all the pollution and then spills, oil spills, right? Or tankers. You see sometimes something's exploded. Yeah. So those are all the problems with the fossil fuel economy we're in now. So reducing the amount of energy reduces that as well. And reducing it will reduce the impact or the effects of climate change. And I say it's a justice issue because of all the people who are suffering disproportionately from it. So when we reduce the amount of energy through energy efficiency measures, we're contributing to justice, right? We're trying to redo that injustice problem, right? So connecting some of the action, we talked about a lot of this last time. So simple things like sealing leaks, right? Keeping the heat in or keeping the cool in. So yeah, we're going to be hotter and hotter in the summer. We're going to need more and more air conditioning. Well, sealing the leaks, that's a good one, right? At least, the idea of having a window open while you got the heat on or the air conditioner on doesn't make sense, right? But we have leaks, which is like opening a window. Uh, Adding more insulation. A lot of our buildings are old. Back then, they didn't worry too much about it. Now we can, and thinking about what kind of insulation too. Is it polyester? Is it your PU? What is it? Polyurethane? Uh, Other materials. You can even actually grow now. Industrial hemp is the possibility of really a really good one. It could be grown and maybe even take up some CO2 as it grows. Double and triple pane windows. Right? These are some of the things, insulation. Controls like thermostats, smart thermostats, lighting systems that shut off when people aren't using them could be considered. LED and other efficient lighting can save you a lot of money and a lot of energy as well. And then particularly if this is in provinces like BC, Manitoba, and Ontario, where we have clean, so-called clean electricity, then that's we're I guess we're not contributing more to climate change by using more electricity, put it that way. Whereas in Alberta, Saskatchewan, you use more electricity, you also contribute a little bit more to climate change and air pollution for that matter. Efficient appliances, induction cooking, for example, or any kind of electrification of appliances, that will help. And electrification is more efficient than say, for example, in mobile, and we're not talking about the mobile part of it, but an electric vehicle is much more efficient than an internal combustion engine vehicle, all things being equal. So that alone is good. As the grid is getting cleaner and cleaner in Alberta and Saskatchewan, electrification also makes sense. But it makes sense even if the grid is not that clean. And of course, Ontario seems to be going the wrong way. They want to add on more greenhouse gas emissions to their grid. Let's see. So other things that we've talked about were higher efficiency furnaces. Now, interestingly, you can go from say 80 or 90% average efficiency for an old furnace up to 98, even 100% efficient. That's not bad, right? But with a heat pump, even an air source heat pump, we can get up to 300% efficiency. And with ground source, even up to 500. So you may be saying, wait a minute, how can you get higher than 100%? Like 100 is 100 over 100, right? How do you get more? Well, the trick is you're borrowing heat from outside, from the air or from the ground. And of course, you're not paying for that heat or the cooling, right? It could be heating or cooling. That's the other thing about heat pumps. They can provide both, whereas a furnace only heats, then you need an air conditioner for the cooling. So heat pumps are the new, well, I mean, they should have been around decades ago, but now everybody's working on heat pumps. They will be the way to go. And as a matter of fact, some of the people are from Manitoba here. I was wondering, would heat pumps work in Manitoba? I think you may have heard a name, Dan Dick. I think I got his name right. He wrote a lot of articles for various Mennonite publications. He has had a heat pump, and he lives in Manitoba, I understand. He has had a heat pump for 15 years, 15 years ago, right? And it's worked, right? I don't know, he maybe have a small little heater for the really, really cold days, right? But you could even use an electric heater. You can get off fossil fuels. And if you look at things like the life cycle over a period of time, 10, 20 years, much, much cheaper. And then we talked about somebody mentioned their solar panels. Yeah, solar. And we can even add batteries to that because the price of batteries is coming down. Now you can generate electricity and store it. So you even have some battery power in the evenings. California now has had for the last about 30 or 40 days, they've had almost all, say 70 or more percent, 80% of their electricity during the day from solar. And then because of the amount of batteries they had, another 2 or 3 hours of battery or electricity from batteries, solar into the batteries, right? And they're buying more and more batteries. They'll have more and more capacity. So this is another thing to do. And I say, especially in Alberta and Saskatchewan, partly because you have a wonderful solar resource, right? Lots of sun, no problem. Even Manitoba, there's especially the southern part. But it's because of grid. Alberta and Saskatchewan have a dirty grid. So when you replace with solar, you're have zero emissions, right? Instead of that. So those are some of the other options that we can do at our churches. And then just to wrap up, low embodied carbon. If you have to build a new wing or something like that, or replace a lot of it, think about the embodied carbon in the materials of your church too, maybe flooring, or if you have to finish that up, or walling, anything like that. The materials, concrete and steel, have a lot of embodied in the life cycle, a lot of embodied greenhouse gas emissions, whereas wood, a lot less. Uh, Behavioral change is something we didn't talk about before. Just the idea of turning off the lights, right? Or turning the air conditioning down a little bit so it's not, I don't need to be at 25 degrees C. Okay, 26, 27, 28, right? That kind of behavioral change. Putting on a coat or a sweater when it's a little bit chillier at home. Yeah, that's that. And then thinking about your water. Water actually has energy in it too. We need water, we need energy to pump the water and everything. So every time we use water, but also our warm water. How much water do we need? Do we leave the water running? That kind of behavioral too, we think of. And then energy to cook and keep our food, especially what Canadians on average, and actually North Americans too, uh, about 30% or more of our food we just throw away. This is consumers' food. Uh, there's some food loss, yes, what in the harvest and the growing and all that, but just from the stuff, I go to the store, I buy $100 worth of food, 30 of it ends up in the garbage. I didn't eat it, right? Now, some of it, of course, may be carrot tops or something like that, right? But some of it's like cook the food, put it in the fridge. Oh, yeah, it's not good anymore. I just throw it away, right? Unfortunately. Or we cook something for, some big meal and it doesn't get all eaten and thrown away, right? That's energy wasted too, right? We can be efficient with that kind of energy as well. And then a few more ideas. So where my book comes in is in the management systems, being smart, being efficient at how we manage ourselves, right? Maybe efficient with your facilities committee or with your, I don't know, your budget committee or anything. Just having organizations within your congregations to manage these important issues and make good decisions. Looking at your economics differently. This is important because if you say, for example, EV cost me $50,000, but I can get a an ICE, internal combustion engine vehicle, for 30. Oh, therefore it's cheaper. Well, that's just the purchase price. If you look at it over a 10 or 20-year period, all the gas coming in, all the maintenance, all the different costs, and you weigh them out. Actually, EVs are already cheaper. And as a matter of fact, they're probably much cheaper. And then with government subsidies, it's a kind of no-brainer. But we have to think about the lifespan of any investment we make, whether it's LEDs or it's rooftop solar or any the heat pumps, anything we do. It's not just today how much money I need, it's over the life cycle. Offsetting. Here's a controversial one. I do a whole seminar on offsetting. And not everybody's happy about offsetting, but what it is paying for every ton of CO2 I emit, I buy an offset that counterbalances that, right? And if you don't like that name offsetting, how about put a name of, how about restitution? We owe, we restore, right? We're restoring, we're paying back what we owe. So I could talk about that indefinitely. That's a pet project of mine. Another one is maximize occupancy. So you have a big church and it's used on Sunday for sure, Sunday morning usually. When else, right? And maybe your congregation just doesn't need it for most of the time. Well, can it be rented out? Can it be loaned out? Clubs or anything. For example, our church has a coding club. So for a few hours, some evenings, kids get in there and they do some coding. Or, I mentioned on the cold days, people come in and stay in there. A lot of churches have done food kitchens, right? Or what do you call it? Food banks. On and on. The ideas are almost endless. I know, yeah, there's some liabilities and you have to work all that stuff out, but then you're really efficient with your building, right? You're using that space efficiently. And sometimes the heating, because you can keep the heat. You don't have to turn it on and turn it off and that kind of thing. That's that maximize that occupancy. And then the final one is land for housing. So you may have your church building, but you have a bigger piece of property. In this day and age of affordability for housing, what about some land? Maybe somebody, you can offer some land and somebody can build some housing on there, and then people could be actually close to church, right? Building community. There's a lot of talk about a community. Um, yeah, people living actually right there near the church. So there's all kinds of things. I want to broaden the idea of efficiency, right? Energy efficiency. So. Discussion and questions. So I went a little bit over. Actually, I went probably two more over. So a little bit of time, Sandy.
Thank you so much, Nelson. I'm gonna post. I just popped into the chat. Do you want to end your screen share so we can
Oh
see
yeah.
there again?
Yeah.
So I just threw a couple questions into the chat for our discussion. I'm so grateful for your challenge to us, and yeah, really for broadening the conversation around energy efficiency. Yes, ground source heat pump does work in Manitoba. We just put one in last summer and it's working great. But I want to leave this now for everybody else. So you can just unmute yourselves. I have 4 questions in the chat. Questions for Nelson. We would love to hear if you are considering a project for your church, if you have questions about that, questions or dilemmas that come up when you consider environmental responsibility. And Nelson touched on a lot of those things to get us thinking. So I will stop talking and invite comments, questions, thoughts. And just when you start to talk, say who you are and where you are. That helps us to locate you. And if I'm looking down, it's because I'm taking notes, so I remember.
I'll share
I
this.
Sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Okay. Yeah, it's Jay Reeser here. About 5 years ago, our church, Hagerman Mennonite Church in Markham, Ontario, we did a a major renovation and rebuild. And we're really pleased with the end product, but it's a lot of changed in the last 6 years. We moved from electric baseboard heating to natural gas heating, and the thinking was, oh, we'll save a lot of money versus the baseboard. But it was just a little bit before heat pumps came along, and so as it turns out, our building went probably because here in Ontario was um, Nelson was explaining, Ontario's got a fairly green grid. So we went from a fairly clean building to a pretty dirty one with all the natural gas that we burned. So it's just a little heads up if you're doing some renovation or a build, really think clearly about your energy efficiency and where you want to end up. Um, we didn't end up exactly where we wanted to, and it's one of my regrets in that build.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Zacharias here in North Culloden in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Nice clean grid. Unfortunately, I've got two natural gas furnaces. Well, two natural gas furnaces, forced air furnace, and then a natural gas boiler in my building. Tough to look at the economics based on the demographics in my church, aging population, etc. That run rate of time that you say you get some efficiencies over a length of time. For me to put solar panels on the roof, I don't know if I'm going to be owning this building in 10 years. That's a topic for another day. I just on a good news standpoint, Manitoba has the Energy Efficiency Manitoba has some grants that pay for some of these things. I'm curious about the grant that Mennonite Church Canada has as well. I hadn't heard about that until just recently, but Efficiency Manitoba paid for the majority of the costs for LED lighting throughout my building, and increasing the amount of insulation in the roof of our sanctuary building. So looking for actually over time, I'm hoping that our costs are going down, and therefore being a dirty building, as Jay called it, it'll be a little less dirty because of what we are spending or having to spend on heat and light. So
Thanks, Jeff. Others.
Herb Cooney here from Edmonton. Nelson had a good point in one of his slides there about you have to do cost effective or like life cycle cost analysis and things like that. We've been at our church, we've been, we've had a plan moving forward, and that included like doing an original evaluation, and an assessment, energy audit, I guess is what we started with, and we modified it. I mean, we're fortunate that we have a number of engineers who are practical thinkers. I'm one too. I'm a professional engineer, so we go through and look at these things. So doing life cycle costs was an important part of our assessment. So when we started off, we started to do some LED bulbs. Then we went into looking at replacing our furnaces because we had a cracked diffuser in there. So we did do a life cycle analysis and cost assessment of going with geothermal. And it made no sense from a carbon footprint point of view, from a life cycle cost point of view, and a cost recovery point of view. We had worked it out at that time, something like 38 years, and it made absolutely zero sense. There were no grants at the time for it, for sure. So that was where part of the problem came in. So I think I just emphasize what Nelson said. It does make sense to look at that. One thing we never really did do is look at the carbon footprint of the replacement products we're doing. Like solar panels have a huge carbon footprint. We know that. They have, by the way, we installed solar panels last year on our church. And instead of buying I'll use the word cheap, versions that you can get for a lower cost. We went with the industrial grade. So we put 35-year guaranteed shingles on our roof, and then we ended up getting solar panels that were guaranteed, and they're actually, the warranty is good for 40 years on these panels. They're industrial grade. So our philosophy around that is, again, looking at the life cycle cost, looking at the huge carbon footprint it takes to build solar panels, because remember, most of the solar panels are built in China, where they use coal-fired plants anyways to do most of the manufacturing. So we tried to be a little more conscientious in our approach in what we did, and paid a little more. We did. It was about a 20% premium for these panels, but our feeling was that we would have panels that were around for much, much longer than the typical normal panels that most people install. So we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint that way also. So I think I just emphasize what Nelson said: do a life cycle cost, go beyond just what people say, do the actual investigation into the numbers, because some of the stuff that's publicized is not necessarily correct. So you need to spend the time and effort to make sure that we're doing a proper job at what we want to do and what we want to achieve. Anyway, that's my comment.
Thanks so much, Herb. And I just want to say, Herb, it's nice to see your face. Herb and I have talked a bunch of times in the last year. First Mennonite Church in Edmonton did receive one of these emissions reduction grants last year. And so if you read the articles on Mennonite Church Canada's website, you'll read about the project that they did. And I'm also just putting in the chat a link to the emissions reduction grant information. Jeffy said it was something you had just recently heard about. We're not going to go into tons of detail here in this call, but I can definitely bring anyone up to speed, or you can check out this resource at the link I gave you. And there are a bunch of, there's lots of information, and I'm happy to help, just to throw that in there. Other comments and questions, please. Thoughts?
It's Paul Rappold here from Breslau Mennonite Church, and we had a bit of a collapse in the old sanctuary. We have a beautiful new sanctuary built in '91, and the old sanctuary then was used as Sunday school and overflow and various other functions. Not as used as much as it needed to be. Well, we had a collapse in the ceiling, and this has brought us to how are we going to utilize this space, and how is it going to serve our church and the community. So we're working hard on how to move forward in a meaningful way for our community as well as our church, and it gives us the opportunity to use materials and technology that will serve us for the next 20 or 30 years. So insulation, we're going new windows, we're going to have a new furnace, we'll use appropriate flooring and wood framing, and but you know, we have a huge church, and really what we and I think other churches too need to think about, how do you utilize it fully? How can you use these wonderful facilities to serve our congregation, but also our community? And we're struggling with that and working hard on that. We've been working on this for several months, and in usual Mennonite fashion, there are many thoughts put forward, many different perspectives, and everyone has a goal. And but over the course of the next few months, I trust we're going to come up with an answer, and we will have a new facility with hopefully the best possible technology to serve us in the future. And as I said, I was the one who said before, we had a solar panel system put on part of our church, and we put a steel roof under it, so we would never have to replace that over the life of the panels. We will continue to redo the roof and possibly, hopefully, add additional panels to our system. So that the solar panel system, I believe, was paid off in less than 7 years, and is working very, very efficiently for us. So that's the story from Breslau.
It's a good story. Paul, it's nice to see your face too. Paul and I have chatted on the phone as well.
Yes, we've talked.
I don't know. I don't know who
talked to
people
you
are. So, lovely.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know how to sign in. I'm not a computer guy, so I didn't sign in, but I am here.
I
Thank you.
appreciate you saying your last name. I was like, oh, okay, now I know. Others.
I'm part of a church in Saskatoon, so we're in the middle of the prairies. We have the dirtiest energy around, probably.
Hmm.
Nelson might know about that. Our grid is at least 80% gas and coal, from what I understand. Now they talk about, it's going to get cleaner, but when you look at what they're talking about doing, I'm not holding my breath. It's not going to get cleaner real fast. Now there is some people doing solar, but that's all private stuff. Not a lot of push on that. We did once have a sort of like a government sponsored program where people could actually get a kind of a cut getting their solar in, and had a really nice system whereby you could get paid nicely for your stuff. Of course, but our local government, our provincial government decided to get rid of that program. And I don't have a clue why, other than maybe I don't know, maybe they thought they couldn't control enough. I don't know. All I know is that we have dirty energy here, but we also have very cold in the middle of winter. So we use gas. Unfortunately, we use gas. Going to straight electric makes 0 sense around here unless you've got more panels than you know what to do with. I do personally. I put a little air-to-air heat pump on my house just as a kind of an experiment, and it works fine. It even works down to 20 degrees below maybe Celsius, but maybe even a bit more. However, the colder it gets, the less efficient it becomes. And and it's pretty soon you're gobbling energy, and it's dirty energy. So we're back to that. I would have solar panels on my house, but if I have nice old 100-year-old trees, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to give up the trees for solar panels. That's a bad idea. On our church, we do have solar panels, not enough to do all of our electrical, but we do have some. It's Wildwood Mennonite Church in Saskatoon. We also recently renovated the building, so we've got a lot of triple glass and a reasonably insulated building. The building was built, oh my goodness, a number of years ago, but I think it's at least R20 or something. Not great, but better than some. But we have 3 furnaces, and they're all gas. They are high efficiency, but they're all gas. One of the things I thought of when we were talking about all this is, well, 2 things actually. One is, changing people's minds about things is not always easy. For example, some of us would like to see maybe better planting in the yard, maybe fruit trees or shrubs or whatever, something that's more than just looking at. But other people say, no, we've tried that and nobody looks after it, and therefore we're not going to do it. And so we just go back to lawn, which you only have to cut once a week, and there you go. So we have an ongoing struggle with the yard. Some people want to pave the parking lot, and you know what that's all about. Covering up the ground, so on. But the other thing is, our church is relatively small in terms of its population, in terms of a membership and all that, in terms of people that come. We're relatively small, and I notice that a lot of our energy goes into keeping the building going. And we do have community use of it in various different ways. Some people rent and so on. But one of the questions we're going to have to face as a church is, do we need all those buildings? And do we need all that size? Because we're getting smaller. I can go to different churches here in town, and you go to church, and there's a few people sitting here, a few people sitting there, and there's a great big amount of space in between. Not very efficient. So that's the thing we're going to have to face, I think, in our churches. I see that wherever I see that, I think it's a thing that's going to be coming up more, especially where we have older populations and so on. Anyways, I'll stop with that.
Yeah, you're right. Jay put a question in the chat, Rick, for you. Did the heat pump lower your gas bill?
A good question. This winter has been so weird. I don't know how to compare it exactly. I know that my electrical bill's gone up, but I think the heat pump is, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a 9,000 BTU, so it's the littlest one I could get, and it's a, what do you call that? A mini split up on the wall in my house, and it's just on one wall in one part of the house. But when that's on, then it heats up a good, maybe half of the main floor, which is not bad. So I mean, I can see a person doing it here. A friend of mine put in a system where they have a complete um, heat pump / furnace system, whereby you have an air source heat pump, and it's designed to work through the furnace. So using your furnace as a blower and everything, and then the furnace picks up the extra slack when it's cold outside, and it's all automated and whatnot. But it's not cheap, and whether it'll be efficient enough over time to be good, I don't know. I think if you do something like that here without having a whole pile of panels on your roof, you're probably not going to gain a whole lot. Maybe some efficiency, but with our dirty energy and electrical bills, our electrical bills are high, so you're not going to save any money. And we pay a lot for electricity, so you're not going to save a lot of money that way. Yeah.
Right.
But some people, I mean, like this friend of mine is doing it on principle. I think, that's a good part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Rick. Other questions or comments? And you can ask a question about the grant too, if you're, we have a few here who received the grant, and also a few here who might be contemplating. And I would, as if you view the Zoom conversation we had on April 24th, you will hear a resounding message from Low Farm Mennonite, which is just apply, just do it. Don't worry about the details. Well, figure out the details, but don't worry about the work, just apply, because it's worth doing. But yeah, any other questions or comments before we wrap up?
I would just have, it's Robert from Listowel Mennonite Church.
Another grant.
I just had a question, a question for Paul at Breslau. You said your solar panels, you had a good payback, that they're paid off in about 7 years. I'm just curious as to what type of a system you had. Did you hydro pay you?
I believe it was a microfit system. And we got, I think we're paid 53 cents, which is not 75 and not probably what it is today. So the payback was good. The contract we felt was good. And we used a better quality solar panel. And I think, I'm not sure how many we have, but I think with the exception of one or two, they're still working at about 100% efficiency. So it has been a good system for us. And it was something initiated by our youth group. We have a great youth leader, and they decided they wanted to do that. And away we went and put a new roof, steel roof and solar panel system on, and that worked well. And I would just like to say, to reiterate the importance, and we're really struggling to serve our community, to try and utilize our space in a way that, there are just little churches. I'm in a little town, and there's a remarkable little United Church, and that parking lot is full every day. Yeah, they have daycares, they have health groups, they have yoga, and personally, I wish we had more of that. I wish we could do more to serve our community. And we are the benefit of being near Kitchener, a large center, so we could draw people. It's just, how do you do that? It's such a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I have a question for Nelson. Nelson, something that's been very inspirational to me has been the passive house system of building. And for those that aren't familiar with it, the passive house is such a high insulation that it takes like body heat and cooking, and just very, very little energy is required to operate that house. So that's been an inspiration to me to, hey, whatever I can do, if I could get to that point where I use so much less in my building, then whether I use gas or electricity, it becomes almost irrelevant. So I don't, like, if you could speak to that a little bit, like super energy, like it sounds like Paul is, they're looking at, redoing their building. Could you speak to that for us a little bit?
Well, certainly in Vancouver, there's something in BC, they call it the energy step code. And I think the last rung or the ultimate is, passive house, which just like you say, like something like a hair dryer or just your body heat can help. And some of the things they do is just make sure there's nothing radiating out. So the way they join the beams and insulate, is brilliant. And it's becoming more and more popular. I don't know. Vancouver, of course, our climate is quite mild. I don't know how it would work in Winnipeg, right? But theoretically, like if it is passive house, you really don't need, like, it's so
No.
well insulated and there's not much heat loss through beams and connections to the outside that, I know it started in Germany, and Germany is not exactly, it's quite far north too. So but I don't know enough about it. But I think that's sort of like where you're ultimately aiming real efficiency, right? Total efficiency.
I think so. So I was just thinking, if you're redoing a building, like triple pane windows may cost you 20% more or something like that, and super air sealing the whole building and energy or pressure test before and after. So that's inspirational to me, to really make a building incredibly tight, which is what the passive house standard is. And so that means I don't need very much electricity. I don't need very much gas to do what I need to do in my home. So that's what I'm shooting for.
Then don't forget, when you do that kind of thing, you have to create a system to bring in new air all the time, because and that takes energy, because now you're having fans and stuff running. But in other words, we can't get away from it totally. Electricity.
Yeah. No, you can't. You absolutely can't. But the idea is to get that you use so little, you just don't. That's the goal. So my cousin he just built a new passive house a few years ago, and they have a 10 kilowatt system on their roof. They're in Stouffville, Ontario, so we got a pretty cold climate. That 10 kilowatt solar panels is supposed to look after all its heating and cooling. It doesn't charge their car. But that to me is inspirational, is just incredibly tight buildings. And of course, as you note, Rick, they do have to have air exchange. But those are they've got that figured out. There was a time they didn't have that figured out, but they have that air exchange figured out now. Very efficient heat exchangers to bring in fresh air.
Did you know that the national research? No, maybe it was this provincial. I'm not sure. There was a research council here at Saskatoon. Some of those guys built passive solar houses, heavily insulated, way back in 1980s or somewhere around there.
Yeah, I've heard, but they ran into problems, didn't they, with moisture?
They were still experimenting, but they did a lot of. In Saskatoon, there are a few places like that where it's super insulated and very, very, very efficient.
Very tight, yeah. That to me that's very inspirational to me. Like, we redid our house, and we worked really hard at sealing everything up so that there's no drafts. At any rate, thanks for talking about that, Nelson.
Great question, Jay. I love looking at diagrams of those houses. Imagining. Anybody else who would like to raise a question or share something about their situation before we head out?
Hi, and greetings to everyone. Maybe I'll just start off with a bit of clarification that you'll probably see my name listed as Corrine. It's not true. It's a lovely name, and my wife has used it for her whole life already. So my name is Rick Lowen. I'm in Winnipeg. We have a small church, and it's used by many different groups almost every night of the week. And we are looking at the grant to update lighting in our church. But one of the more pressing issues coming up on the horizon, the near, is roofing concerns. And so someone had made a comment earlier about permanent roofing versus asphalt shingles. And so if somebody could just tell me or give me a little bit more information about permanent roofing, is that steel roofing Or what does that all mean? Thanks.
Jay, I think that was your comment in the chat.
If you go to steel, I would go with steel. We have too big of a roof, so it wasn't economical for us. That's why we went with the high warranty shingles, and they were a composite shingle. But still, I think steel would be the best to go.
Yeah.
If you can afford it.
I would concur. I'm amazed. I just recently moved to Kitchener, and there are so many houses in this community that have permanent roofs. I'm gonna just call it a permanent roof, whether it's steel or some kind of shingle. I'm not sure exactly.
Composite,
Some of
yeah.
them are very attractive, and it's one of my pet peeves that we put asphalt shingles on, and then a matter of they may be guaranteed for 20 years, but you know, sometimes they don't even make it to 20, and then they just take it all off and it all goes to the dump. It's one of my pet peeves. And so steel roof, if in 50 years it's leaking, in theory you can recycle that roof and they can make it into another roof. So I think it's good value to look at. I'm just going to call it a permanent roof, even if it does cost a premium. It's, to me, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Great question, Rick, and thanks for identifying yourself.
Well, roofs are a problem for us too. Part of our church roof is a flat roof, and the furnace or the sanctuary that's where it is installed. And so because we also have morning service, afternoon service, evening service. So in the summer, the afternoon is very hot. And so the church that is coming in the afternoon, they want air conditioning. And so we have restarted. Last summer we restarted it, and oh, it's like $2,000 for to air condition the sanctuary for the summer. So yeah, it's and the roof, the flat roof, also has problems, even though it's only 8 years old, but it's leaking. I think it has leaked from before my time, before I knew anything about it. So in the first 3 years, it has already leaked, and the foam surface that was chosen at that time, it was good for in Arizona, but not in Edmonton. And so, yeah, so that's a big, it's sort of the elephant for us in the room. Something has to be done. And I mean, if we would trace it and it's not such a big area, and put something on, like a steel roof, and solar panels, even if it's just for the sanctuary. I mean, this would be my dream, right? But yeah, 50% grant does not cut it. It's like, it's super expensive, and we certainly can't afford it. Our money goes to, the pastor, our worship. So it's there, and we'll try and find solutions for that.
Thanks. And Margot, can you say the name of your church again and location so people know where you're calling in from?
Yeah, it's the Holyrood Mennonite Church in Edmonton.
Holyrood has some really great stories on the Mennonite Church Alberta website if you're ever interested in learning more about Holyrood.
Yeah, we're trying.
All right. Anyone else have a question or comment?
I was just gonna say, and I know I keep saying this every time, but these conversations just show like just the variety, right? And how there really is no one size fits all based on where you are and the size of your community and like all those details, right? Which is what I find so interesting about this, but it also is what the challenge is in looking for advice or recommendations from each other too, right?
Yeah, and depending on your grid even, right? Which we've
Mhm.
identified here, yeah. All right, well, Nelson, do you have a final piece of advice before I ask Christy to close us off here?
Well, I think the best advice is that maybe pray and try to glorify God in your decisions, right? And yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's a good motivation, right? And I think we can have a great testimony for others. And I think a lot of your churches will do already, right? And in some of the things you're doing. So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Nelson, for challenging us and broadening the picture. And thank you to all of you for coming and sharing. It feels like we could probably spend quite a bit more time and dig way deeper into these things. So I'm going to hang on to all of your names and where you're from. And, you know, this conversation was a year in the making, and there may be more conversations to be had. So I may be checking in with each of you and asking, how can we continue these important conversations across our nationwide family of faith? So thank you. Thank you for being here and sharing. And if you are considering applying for a grant, I am the Sandy Plutt that you would talk to. The link I put in the chat is where you would go to get the information, and I will say, do it. I will encourage you every step of the way. I want a lot of grant applications by September, which is when they're due. So you have time to discuss it, time to follow through all the steps in the grant process, time to get your congregation on board, and you'll even know if you're getting the grant before next year's budget is needs to be approved. So hopefully we've set it up in such a way that you've got lots of time to think and get your ducks in a row and get your people on board so that when it's time to go, you can go. I'm grateful to Mennonite Church Canada for supporting this grant, and I will send you a couple of links to follow this up, showing you where some other conversations are that have more information about the grant and how to donate to it and so on. I have asked Christy to close us with a blessing of the buildings or something like that. And so Christy, would you take it away for us, please?
Sure. May God bless our various buildings, from roofs to floors, peaks and basements, from wall to wall, doors and windows. May God bless our communities, our committees and researchers, our dreamers and question askers, our grant writers and decision makers. May we be good stewards of our resources, our buildings, and our finances. May we honor our Creator and our Mother Earth in our conversations and our relationships and our decisions. And may we do all of this with gratitude and joy. Amen.
amen. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Christy, and thank you, everyone. I'll see you
Good
all
night.
again.
Good night.
Good night.